Brixton, London, England, January 8th, 1947. David Robert Jones is born. He grew up in this house in a city recovering after being severely hit by the German Air Force during World War II. His mom, a waitress. His dad worked for a children's charity. From an early age, David knew he wanted to be an entertainer when he grew up. He loved singing, dancing, and acting. When David was 9 years old, his dad brought him home some American 45s that featured artists like Fats Domino, Elvis Presley, and Little Richard. David later would say that he had heard God after first listening to Little Richard's song Tutti Frutti. From that point forward, he became obsessed with American rock and roll. When David was 11, he began attending Bromley Technical High School. There, he'd have an art teacher who had a big influence on him. His name was Owen Frampton. David would eventually become friends with Owen's son, Peter, over their shared love of music. Owen predicted that David would one day be a big star. David's half-brother, Terry, also had a big influence on him. When Davey was 15, something happened that would define his entire aesthetic. His buddy George Underwood punched him in the eye during a fight over a girl. Well, George must have felt bad since the punch permanently damaged Davey's eyesight. Hey, but it also made him look cool. The punch left one pupil permanently dilated, which made it look like his eyes were two different colors. Around that time, Davey started his first band, the Conrads. He played saxophone and occasionally sang. They played rock and roll at local youth dances and weddings. George was in the band. Yeah, they made up. Well, the band didn't work out though, but Davey kept writing songs anyway. He dropped out of school and informed his parents he wanted to become a pop star. His parents, while supportive, still told him he had to make money. His mom hooked him up with an electrician apprenticeship. Meanwhile, Davey joined another band called the King Bees, but that didn't last long since he was sick of them playing covers, and he joined another band called the Manish Boys. Davey was determined and ambitious. After recording a few songs, he wrote a wealthy businessman named John Bloom to fund his music, writing that his music could help Bloom, quote, make another million. Well, Bloom didn't respond to this offer, but he did hook up Davey with a dude named Leslie Kahn to be his first manager. Whoa. That's pretty groovy. Kahn produced and promoted Bowie's debut single, Liza Jane, and got a record label named Vocal Lion Records to release it on June 5th, 1964. Liza Jane never caught on. The Manish Boys then recorded a cover of Bobby Bland's I Pity the Fool, and Parlophone Records would release it as a single on March 6th, 1965, but it also flopped. By that time, Davey had joined yet another blues band called The Lower Third. They were heavily influenced by The Who. The Who? Yes. The Who. They recorded a song called You've Got a Habit of Leaving, which Parlophone released on August 20th, 1965. After it also flopped, Davey dropped Kahn as his manager and decided he wanted to become a mime instead. You heard that right. Still, though, he just kept coming back to music, continuing to write and record songs. He got a new manager, Ralph Horton, who helped him get a record deal with High Records. And it was at this time he changed his stage name because there was already a Davy Jones in the popular band The Monkees, and Davy didn't want to be confused with a teen idol. He took the surname Bowie after the American folk hero James Bowie, and the knife he made popular. I guess it sounded cooler. Pie released Bowie's song Can't Help Thinking About Me on January 14th, 1966. Well, it also flopped, and shortly afterward, Bowie left The Lower Third. On April 1st, 1966, Pie released Bowie's first song entirely credited to himself, Do Anything You Say. Bowie still found a backing band to perform the song called The Buzz while recording his next single, though, producer Tony Hatch dropped the buzz and found session musicians. That single was I Dig Everything, released on Pi on August 19th, 1966. Well, Do Anything You Say and I Dig Everything also flopped. Dang. Despite this, music industry folks saw lots of potential with this young man named David Bowie, who is now still just 19 years old. After playing for a short while with the band The Riot Squad, Bowie signed with Darum Records, or D-Rum Records. I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry. In October, he recorded a Baroque pop song called Rubber Band, which was much more creative than his previous efforts, and Darum released it on December 2nd, 1966. While it also was a flop, getting absolutely no radio airplay, critics later would praise the song. In January, Bowie sped up his vocals to sound high-pitched to portray a gnome in a song eventually called The Laughing Gnome, released by Darum on April 14th, 1967. Another single, another flop. Although, more and more critics were starting to notice Bowie. They especially adored his debut studio album called just David Bowie, released by Darum on June 1st, 1967. The album was a mix of British vaudeville and Baroque pop, and it also never really caught on, despite having some pretty catchy songs on it. After playing a few small shows to promote it, Bowie became alienated with the direction of his career. Things were not going as he planned. After more than 5 years of trying to become a pop star, he felt he didn't have much to show for it. He returned to theater and acting, considering giving miming another go. For 2 years, he was kind of lost. Still writing songs, though. In April 1969, Bowie met Angela Barnett, and they immediately fell in love, getting married within a year. Barnett would have a dramatically positive effect on Bowie's career. Soon after beginning a relationship with Angela, he'd record a song that would change everything. Space Oddity, a tale about a fictional astronaut named Major Tom, who ended up being the first of Bowie's several famous recurring characters. The song caught the attention of Mercury Records and its United Kingdom subsidiary, Philips, who signed Bowie with a new deal and released Space Oddity as a single on July 11th, 1969. Perfectly timed, as it was just 5 days before American astronauts would leave Earth to become the first humans to land on the moon. Space Oddity would be David Bowie's first hit song, reaching number 5 on the UK singles chart. On November 14th, 1969, Mercury and Philips released Bowie's second studio album, David Bowie. Wait, wasn't his first album also called David Bowie? It was. It was. What the heck? That's confusing. Well, people ended up just calling the album Space Oddity to differentiate the two. Despite the success of the song Space Oddity, the album Space Oddity actually didn't do that well and got mixed reviews. But hey, at least Bowie was now more motivated to make even better music. He put together a full-time backing band that included drummer Mick Woodmansey, producer and bassist Tony Visconti, and guitarist Mick Ronson. Bowie would sing and play 12-string guitar. They eventually called themselves Hype. Their first live performance didn't go so well, but at least they looked cool, appearing on stage in flamboyant costumes. They lived together in basically what looked like a haunted mansion as they recorded what would become Bowie's third studio album, The Man Who Sold the World, released by Mercury and Philips on November 4th, 1970. This album marked a dramatic shift for Bowie's music. Unlike the orchestral pop of his previous two albums, The Man Who Sold the World was much heavier and darker. Although critics generally praised the album, it was another commercial failure for Bowie. But frankly, The Man Who Sold the World was just ahead of its time. Today, music historians say it inspired entirely new genres of music, like goth rock and dark wave. The title track of the album is today one of Bowie's most streamed songs on Spotify, in part part because Nirvana covered it and released it as a single for their MTV Unplugged New York album. To promote The Man Who Sold the World, Bowie and the Hype toured all over the UK and even played some shows in the United States. It's important to remember that Bowie wasn't just interested in music, he was interested in performance. He wanted to become different characters to provoke and challenge expectations. He began giving interviews wearing dresses, and the press loved it. While in the United States, Bowie became intrigued by two American musicians, Lou Reed and Iggy Pop. Inspired by those two, as well as Vince Taylor, Andy Warhol, the legendary Stardust Cowboy, and Kansai Yamamoto, he came up with a new character, Ziggy Stardust. Stardust eventually would become Bowie's most iconic alter ego. The character blurred the lines of rock star, alien messiah, and self-destructive celebrity, of course. In the summer of 1971, the hype was no more. But Bowie recorded a bunch of new songs anyway, this time with producer Ken Scott and bassist Trevor Bolder. These new songs marked a shift back to melodic pop rock. Bowie played many of the instruments himself. He dropped Mercury and Philips this time, going with RCA Records, who released what became Bowie's fourth studio album, Hunky Dory, on December 17th, 1971. While it was another commercial flop, today it's considered one of Bowie's several masterpieces. Seriously, it is aged like fine wine. A big reason why it flopped, actually, was because RCA did a crappy job promoting it. The two singles on Hunky Dory, Changes, and Life on Mars did become minor radio hits. Of course, today they are two of his most recognized songs. Another notable song off Hunky Dory that got some radio airplay is Oh, You Pretty Things, today considered one of Bowie's greatest songs. Other notable songs? Kooks, which was dedicated to Bowie's newborn son, Duncan. Queen Bitch is dedicated to Lou Reed. Song for Bob Dylan is dedicated to Bob Dylan, and Andy Warhol is dedicated to Richard Nixon. Just kidding. Andy Warhol. I'm gay and always have been, even when I was David Jones. That was a quote by Bowie, featured in the British music magazine Melody Maker on January 22nd, 1972, which was a big deal at the time as people were generally more homophobic back then. Bowie later clarified that he was bisexual, by the way. In the months following, Bowie began appearing in public as Ziggy Stardust, the androgynous alien rock star from a distant planet. He dyed his hair red, wore heavy makeup, and strutted around in wild jumpsuits. Now his backing bands were the Spiders from Mars, featuring Mick Ronson, Mick Woodmansey, and Trevor Bolder. Their live performances became dramatically more popular after Ziggy and Spiders from Mars appeared. Meanwhile, they had recorded new stuff that would make up Bowie's fifth studio album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, often just shortened to Ziggy Stardust, considered both a rock opera and a concept album centered on the Ziggy character. RCA released it on June 16, 1972. The album featured three huge hits, but all three only became huge long after they were first released. The title track, Suffragette City, and Starman. Starman did get a lot of radio airplay and reached the top 10 of the pop charts of several countries. Today, it's the second most streamed song by Bowie on Spotify. A key TV moment came on July 6, 1972, when Bowie and the Spiders from Mars appeared on the BBC's Top of the Pops show to perform Starman as Ziggy. Ziggy Stardust is one of the defining records of the emerging glam rock movement, and it seemed that Bowie was clearly the leader of that movement. This was the album that turned Bowie into a star. Critics adored it, eventually selling more than 7.5 million copies. Today, it's Bowie's second highest-selling album of all time. While touring to promote the album, Bowie wrote a bunch of new stuff. He and the band came back to England to record the songs in late 1972 and early 1973. This ended up making up what became Bowie's sixth studio album, Aladdin Sane. RCA released it on April 13th, 1973. The album was another critical critical and commercial success, featuring these 4 singles. The Gene Genie peaked at number 2 on the UK singles chart. Drive-In Saturday, an ode to 1950s doo-wop, peaked at number 3 on the same chart. Time and Let's Spend the Night Together, a cover of the Rolling Stones classic tune. Both didn't do as well on the radio. However, Bowie did have another big radio hit with Sorrow, another cover song originally by the McCoys, released by RCA on September 28, 1973. By that time, Bowie had retired from being Ziggy Stardust. In fact, back on July 3rd, 1973, he had announced on stage, quote, "Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do." What he meant by that, as it turns out, was that it would be the last show Ziggy and the Spiders from Mars would ever do. A documentary later came out that featured clips from that legendary show. But anyway, yeah, Bowie indeed broke up the Spiders from Mars and moved his family to the United States, eventually settling in Los Angeles. His glam rock era was over. It was around this time that Bowie began using more dangerous drugs. He had used cannabis and psychedelics before, but now he was on a rotation of using cocaine and amphetamines to give him energy, and alcohol and sleeping pills to bring him down. RCA released Bowie's 7th studio album, Pin-Ups, on October 19th, 1973. Pin-Ups featured nothing but covers. That said, several music critics have said it's one of the best covers albums of all time. No big deal. Meanwhile, by the end of the year, 5 of Bowie's first 6 albums were now in the top 40 and 3 in the top 15. After years in the underground, he had propelled to the mainstream. But now he wanted to do something entirely different. First, he attempted a musical. Then he started writing a TV adaptation of George Orwell's novel, 1984. While both didn't work out, it did lead to more new music. In early 1974, he headed back to the studio to record new songs. Many he recorded by himself, and yes, many would make the cut for his 8th studio album, Diamond Dogs, released by RCA on May 24th, 1974. Diamond Dogs was much more raw and experimental than his previous releases. That said, mainly due to the momentum of his popularity at the time, the album did commercially well, spawning 3 singles: the title track, 1984, and Rebel Rebel, which was another big radio hit and gave us this brief David Bowie as a pirate era. Reviews of Diamond Dogs were more mixed. Around the time RCA released his first official live album, David Live, what a name of an album that is, Bowie decided it was time for his Plastic Soul era. What was Plastic Soul, you ask? Well, quote, "The squashed remains of ethnic music as it survives in the age of Muzak, written and sung by a white limey." Of course, that's how he really described it. Now, obviously, he was making fun of himself there, but I'd describe it as basically inauthentic soul music. Kind of an oxymoron there. Bowie worked with various funk and soul musicians in Philadelphia. What resulted was his 9th studio album, Young Americans, released by RCA on March 7th, 1975. Young Americans marked another dramatic shift in David Bowie's sound and image. It was groove-heavy and filled with his most danceable tunes yet. Many fans were surprised at this change in style. Still, critics generally praised Young Americans, and it was another commercial success. It was Bowie's first album to reach the top 10 on the Billboard 200. It featured 2 singles, the title track and Fame, a collaboration with the John Lennon. Yep, his Plastic Soul was catching on. On November 4th, 1975, Bowie performed on Soul Train, which was a big deal as he was only the 2nd white artist to ever appear on the show. And around this time, he had started trying out a new character, the Thin White Duke. Yeah. It ended up being arguably his most controversial figure due to him saying apparently pro-fascism statements during interviews. Bowie claimed this was all theatrical and he was just being provocative. Those weren't his actual views. Regardless, a lot of people didn't like it, and Bowie would later blame his cocaine use for causing it. On January 23rd, 1976, RCA released Bowie's 10th studio album, Station to Station, co-produced by the very successful Harry Maslin. The album marked a shift from Bowie's plastic soul to krautrock, an experimental form of rock music associated with West Germany. Station to Station was another critical and commercial success, reaching the top 5 on both the UK and American album charts. Today it's considered one of Bowie's best albums. Featuring just 6 songs, Station to Station featured 3 singles: Golden Years, TVC 15, and Stay. During the first half of 1976, Bowie toured to support the album, still appearing as the Thin White Duke. Meanwhile, he had begun acting in Hollywood films. He got his first leading role with The Man Who Fell to Earth, playing an alien who came to Earth in search of water for his dying planet.
What do you do? For a living, I mean.
Oh, just visiting.
Oh, a traveler.
After first coming out on March 18th, 1976, the film eventually had a big cult following. In the summer of 1976, Bowie's addiction to cocaine had gotten pretty bad, and he and his now friend Iggy Pop, who was also addicted to heavy drugs, both decided they should move far away from California to try to get clean. They ended up in Europe. Bowie moved his family to Switzerland and then spent some time in France. After that, it was to West Berlin to record a bunch of new stuff with Brian Eno. Tony Visconti, who had helped produce most of Bowie's previous albums, also followed him to West Berlin. What resulted was another masterpiece, Low, which would be Bowie's 11th studio album. This album was yet another radical departure from his previous work, both sonically and structurally. Bowie had now fully embraced synthesizers and instrumentals. I mean, you probably could thank Brian Eno for that. Despite this being some of Bowie's most ambitious music yet, RCA was hesitant to release Low, fearing it was too experimental. When it did finally release it on January 14th, 1977, it didn't promote it much. And despite some critics initially just not getting into Low, it'd be another commercial success for Bowie, featuring 2 hits, Sound and Vision and Be My Wife. Today, Low is also considered to be one of Bowie's best albums. Low was the first of 3 groundbreaking albums in a row by Bowie, nicknamed the Berlin Trilogy, as they were all mostly recorded in West Berlin and more ambient and heavily textured due to Brian Eno's influence. The second Berlin Trilogy album was Heroes, Bowie's 12th studio album, released by RCA on October 14th, 1977. The legendary guitarist Robert Fripp of King Crimson joined him for this one. Heroes was the most critically praised of the Berlin Trilogy. The title track, though initially only a minor hit, ended up being one of Bowie's most recognized songs. Bowie went on a world tour to promote Heroes, playing in Australia for the first time. Despite giving a ton of interviews during this time, he notably abandoned playing characters. He was no longer the Thin White Duke, he was just David Bowie. The third Berlin Trilogy album was Lodger, Bowie's 13th studio album, released by RCA on May 25th, 1979. Though often considered the weakest of the trilogy, today Lodger is often considered one of Bowie's most underrated albums. It featured 4 singles: Boys Keep Swingin', DJ, Yassassin, and Look Back in Anger.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Bowie.
On December 15th, 1979, Bowie made his first appearance on Saturday Night Live. Meanwhile, Bowie had kept on acting, starring in a West German film called Just a Gigolo. 1980 was another transformational year for Bowie. He decided to stop being so experimental and once again embrace pop music, returning to both England and the United States to record new stuff with Visconti. It would be their last collaboration for 20 years. What resulted was Bowie's 14th studio album, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, released by RCA on September 12th, 1980. It'd be his most successful album since Young Americans and got to the top of the UK albums chart. It featured 4 singles: Ashes to Ashes, Fashion, Up the Hill Backwards, and the title track. 1980 also marked Bowie's debut on Broadway. He portrayed a disfigured man in a play called The Elephant Man. Critics and audiences generally loved Bowie's performance, but the role was physically and emotionally draining for him. Speaking of physically and emotionally draining, 1980 also was when his half-brother, Terry, himself, and he and Angela got divorced. Bowie got full custody of their son. On December 8th, 1980, an insane fan murdered John Lennon outside of his apartment building in New York City. Apparently, the murderer had also planned on murdering Bowie. Crazy enough, Lennon's death may have saved Bowie's life. Obviously, this had a profound effect on him, especially since Lennon was a friend. That all aside, Bowie was just burnt out. He canceled an upcoming tour and decided to take a break from performing. He and his son moved back to Switzerland, and for the next 2 years, Bowie became a bit of a recluse. Still, he continued to write, record, and act, playing lead roles in the BBC adaptation of Ball and in the movies The Hunger and Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, both which came out in 1983. But before that, a massive hit collaboration with the band Queen. They paired to record Under Pressure. Despite it being Bowie's third #1 hit in the UK, this seemed to be the song more than any other that made David Bowie a household name. Based on this new momentum, in late 1982, Bowie returned to New York City to record new songs. Now with a new record label, EMI America, Bowie intentionally wanted to make a new wave album with mainstream appeal. He worked with the guitarist Nile Rodgers and his band, Chic, as well as a little-known blues guitarist named Stevie Ray Vaughan. For the first time, Bowie only sang and didn't play any instruments. EMI America released his 15th studio album, Let's Dance, on April 14th, 1983. Mainstream appeal indeed. Let's Dance was Bowie's most commercially successful album by far. It remains his best-selling album, eventually selling more than 10.7 million copies worldwide. Though critics were more mixed about it, the album had 3 massive hits: the title track, Modern Love, and China Girl, which was a cover originally by his friend Iggy Pop. Let's Dance topped many pop charts around the world, and the music video for the song, as well as the one for China Girl, made Bowie a mainstay on MTV. Even if when he went on MTV, he talked trash about them.
I'm just floored by the fact that there's so few black artists featured on it. Why is that?
With Let's Dance, David Bowie had arguably reached the peak of his popularity. He returned to touring for the first time in 5 years, playing his longest and most well-attended tour yet. And after the tour ended, Bowie took a break before returning to the studio in the fall of 1984, recording with Iggy Pop. He remained determined to record more pop songs, this time, though, influenced more by reggae, as demonstrated in the song he did with Tina Turner called Tonight. EMI America released the album Tonight, Bowie's 16th studio album, on September 24th, 1984, and it was another commercial success. In addition to the title track, it featured 2 other singles, Blue Jean and Loving the Alien. Critics, though, mostly trashed trashed it. Bowie himself was not particularly impressed with how Tonight turned out. Keep in mind that this was the first time in his career that many critics were talking trash about his music all at the same time. Around that time, Jim and Brian Henson met with Bowie to see if he could play Jareth the Goblin King in the upcoming film Labyrinth, a dark and surreal fairy tale, basically. Bowie was intrigued, agreed to the role, and also agreed to record some songs for the soundtrack. Though initially a flop, Labyrinth became another cult classic. Out of all of Bowie's films, it arguably had the longest lasting cultural impact. In the fall of 1986, Bowie recorded some new songs, reunited with his childhood pal, Peter Frampton. Remember him? Who by now was also a rock star. Here is a lovely video of the two around that time, looking for a beer in Madrid. Anyway, the new songs made up what became Bowie's 17th studio album, Never Let Me Down, released by EMI America on April 21st, 1987. Though the album also did commercially well, critics also generally talked trash about it. Still, Never Let Me Down featured 3 singles, Day In, Day Out, Time Will Crawl, and the title track. Bowie went on another hugely successful worldwide tour to promote the album, and Frampton even joined him on stage for it on lead guitar. Pretty cool. By 1988, Bowie had grown frustrated with himself not being as creative as he once was, and so he started a hard rock band. He began jamming with some Americans, guitarist Reeves Gabrels, bassist Tony Fox Sales, and Tony's brother, the drummer Hunt Sales. Together, they formed Tin Machine. After spending most of the 1980s as a mainstream pop star, Bowie used Tin Machine to reboot himself. They recorded 2 albums that did moderately well. In 1990, Bowie got set up on a blind date with Iman Mohammed Abdulmajid. Well, this was one of those blind dates that worked out because they'd get married 2 years later and they'd stay together for the rest of his life. Also in 1990, without Tin Machine, Bowie went on a greatest hits tour. He played 108 shows in 27 different countries and 5 continents. Perhaps this experience made him miss doing solo stuff. Regardless, in 1992, Bowie broke up Tin Machine and returned to various studios to record a new solo album, returning to work with Nile Rodgers. This marked the beginning of his electronic music period, you could say. He embraced drum machines and loops. The lyrics were more personal. What resulted was his 18th studio album, Black Tie, White Noise, released this time by Arista Records in the UK and Savage Records in the United States on April 5th, 1993. Despite getting mixed reviews, the album had 3 radio hits in the UK, Jump They Say, Miracle Goodnight, and the title track. Instead of touring, Bowie released a film, also called Black Tie, White Noise, to go with the album. In the summer of 1993, Bowie recorded the soundtrack for The Buddha of Suburbia, a BBC show, but the show only ended up playing the title track, so he decided to release the rest of it as his 19th studio album. Arista released it on November 8th, 1993. Despite having some fans today, the album was Bowie's biggest flop since Hunky Dory in 1994. Inspired by the show Twin Peaks, Bowie decided to record another concept album following another murder mystery, but centered on the fictional town of Oxford Town, New Jersey. He even wrote a short story to go with the album. Brian Eno returned to produce it with him. What resulted was Outside, Bowie's 20th studio album, released by 4 different record labels on September 25th, 1995. Critics were mixed, but it did get up to number 8 in the UK and number 21 in the United States. Outside also had 2 minor radio hits, Strangers When We Meet and Hollow Space Boy, which the Pet Shop Boys Boys remixed for the album. By this time, Bowie was already a legend. His popularity had only steadily increased throughout his career, mostly since each younger generation also fell in love with his music, and he began hanging out and performing shows with much younger bands. For example, Nine Inch Nails toured with him for his Outside tour. In 1996, Bowie reunited with Reeves Gabrels to continue his drum and bass obsession and recorded what would become his 21st studio album, Earthling, released by these labels on February 3rd, 1997. Critics were once again mixed about it. The single I'm Afraid of Americans did particularly well on alternative rock radio stations. That one was remixed by the aforementioned Nine Inch Nails. Earthling featured two other minor radio hits, Little Wonder and Dead Man Walking. Earthling also notably featured Telling Lies, the first ever downloadable single by a major artist. Whoa! Downloading a song onto a computer? What a concept. After the tour promoting Earthling wrapped up, Bowie took a bit of a break before recording the soundtrack for a video game in which he and his wife Iman recorded voices for, called Omicron: The Nomad Soul. Around that time, Bowie also recorded his 22nd studio album, Hours, originally released directly by Bowie himself through his website on September 21st, 1999, which was a big deal at the time. Virgin Records released the physical version a few days later. Hours had three minor radio hits: Thursday's Child, Survive, and Seven. The album marked another big shift in Bowie's sound. Hours was much softer and sounded much more like his earlier stuff, like his stuff from the late 1960s and early 1970s, and thus marked his Neoclassicist Era, a period in which he stopped trying to sound like someone else and instead tried to sound like himself in the past. This era continued with his 23rd studio album, Heathen, released by ISO and Columbia Records on June 10th, 2002. Critics generally praised Heathen. That's right, the critics were back, baby, and maybe because of that Visconti magic. He had returned to help Bowie produce the album. Still, though, Heathen struggled to find commercial success, spawning just two minor radio hits, Slow Burn and Everyone Says Hi. Feeling artistically rejuvenated, Bowie quickly returned to the studio with Visconti to record a follow-up. That follow-up, Bowie's 24th studio album, Reality, released by ISO and Columbia on September 15th, 2003. Critics also generally praised the album. It featured the single New Killer Star, which is a darn good song, in my opinion, but, yeah. Reality was another commercial flop. As he had done with the previous two albums, Bowie had gone on worldwide tours to promote the new material. The Reality tour was notable because he played a bunch of old favorites at shows, some of which he hadn't played in decades. It was also his longest and most ambitious tour ever, with more than 110 shows in 28 different countries. It would have been longer, but on June 25th, 2004, he had a heart attack while on stage at the Hurricane Festival in Germany. Of course, at the time, he didn't know he was having a heart attack while performing, and even finished the show despite the discomfort. Afterward, he was rushed to a hospital for emergency surgery. While he did eventually slowly recover, he had to cancel the remaining 14 shows of the tour. And although he played a few songs live here and there, after this, he would never tour again. Over the next 8 years, he'd rarely even make public appearances. On February 8th, 2006, he didn't even show up to receive his Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Sure, he sent minor contributions to artists here and there, but often he turned invitations down, and rumors swirled that he must have still been in poor health. Oh, but music was still on his mind. Throughout 2011 and 2012, he secretly recorded new material, again working with Tony Visconti and a bunch of younger guest musicians. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, ISO and Columbia released his 25th studio album the next day on January 8th, 2013, his 66th birthday. It caught almost everybody by surprise. Many critics said The Next Day was Bowie's best album in decades, and today is considered among his best. It was also a commercial success, topping the UK albums chart and getting up to number 2 on the Billboard 200. The Next Day featured Bowie's first UK top 10 single in more than 20 years. Where Are We Now? The music video for that song was controversial as it poked fun at the Catholic Church. YouTube even temporarily banned it. In the summer of 2014, Bowie became diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer, but he kept this private. He approached Visconti soon after this saying he'd like to record one final album, a swan song or parting gift for all his fans before he died. Visconti was one of the few people Bowie actually told about the cancer diagnosis. The two once again recorded in secret, but again bringing many guest musicians, the folks he collaborated with during the recording. They had no idea he was terminally ill. Though in tremendous pain, Bowie remained determined to finish the record. What resulted was his final album, Black Star, released by ISO, Columbia, and Sony Records on January 8th, 2016. His 69th birthday, Black Star was a critical and commercial success, becoming his only album to top the Billboard 200 and one of his highest-selling albums of all time. Just 2 days after Black Star's release, Bowie died at his home in New York City. Because he kept his illness private, news of his death shocked fans around the world. Throughout his career, David Bowie released 26 studio albums, 9 live albums, 2 soundtracks, 26 compilation albums, 8 EPs, 128 singles, and 6 box sets. Holy crap. He has sold more than 100 million records worldwide. And all this despite being, well, weird, man. David Bowie was one of the weirdest pop stars in history. He was so weird that he was pretty dang far ahead of his time. Throughout his career, he won 6 Grammy Awards, but of those, only one of them was when he was actually alive. All this brings me to my final point. You know how earlier in this video I said that Bowie had reached the peak of his popularity with the release of Let's Dance? Well, the more I think about it, I don't think he has even reached his peak in popularity yet. I mean, the world still isn't completely ready for him. David Bowie redefined what it meant to be an artist. He showed the world that change was the point of art, and that change should constantly be embraced. He was constantly reinventing himself, constantly experimenting and innovating. He helped make it cool to be a misfit, a queer symbol who boldly spoke up for marginalized people in society when most other artists were too afraid to. He reminded us that identity is fluid, expression is freedom, and all of us can be heroes, even if it's just for one day. So what's your favorite David Bowie song? Album? Era? Character? Let me know down below. I think his most underrated album is Reality. Not that you cared, but maybe you did. Also, let me know which artist you'd like for me to cover next. And a shout out to my friend Sean Wilson. He was the one who first got me into Bowie back in high school. Thanks for watching.